विश्वं दर्पण दृश्यमान नगरी तुल्यं निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्वोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यस्साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये बीजस्यान्तरिवाङ्कुरो जगदिदं प्राङ्निर्विकल्पं पुनः मायाकल्पितदेशकालकलना वैचित्रचित्रीकृतं मायावीव विजृम्भयत्यभिमः योगी वयस्वेच्छया तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नमः इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये। ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ वर्स् 24 प्रकाशोऽर्कस्य तो यस्य शैत्यमग्नेर्यथोष्णता स्वभावः सच्चिदानन्द नित्यनिर्मलतात्मनः। So, in the previous verses, Shankaracharya ji refuted all attributes which we claim as ourselves. That's what the Vedanta's purpose is. Drop the notion. Don't do anything. Don't bring any change. No change. There is no process of becoming something. You cannot become an existence entity. You cannot become consciousness. What is inert will remain inert. What is subject to death will remain subject to death. What is limited will remain limited. That's all. Therefore, Brahman, which is basically existence, consciousness and limitlessness or fullness, you cannot become. One cannot become full. One is limited, will remain limited. You cannot fill up the limitations of the physical body, mind, senses. So if you consider physical body, mind, sense complex as a self, you have to give up the hope of becoming free from all the limitations. You cannot become full. Well, this is also subject to birth, death, etc. So you cannot become existence, free from birth and death. All the time, survive. Past, present, future. Considering body, mind, sense complex as the self and want to survive forever, well, forget about it. And you cannot become conscious because this is inert. Oh, then only thing required is, well, I have to drop the notion. That's all. Drop the notion that I am physical body, mind, sense complex. That's all only. And therefore, basically, so in previous verses, Shankaracharya ji refuted all attributes which we claim as ourselves because they belong to this anatma, body, mind, sense complex, like kartrutvam, bhoktrutvam, raga, dvesha. What are the things negated? I'm just enlisting you for you. So, well, kartrutvam, bhoktrutvam, raga, dvesha, ichha, sukha, dukkha, etc. all have been negated. Then if they are not Atma, what is the nature of Atma? Well, we said Atma's nature is distinct from that. That's all. Distinct from that. If that is negated, then definitely you must be something distinct from that. If physical body and the attributes of the body are negated by the Shastra, in Shastra's vision you are not that. You are not the physical body and you are not the attributes or activity of the body. Well, therefore, I must be the distinct from the physical body. I must be distinct from the attributes of the physical body called sex and then gender and ashram and varna and whatnot. All this. Height, weight and all this. And also, I am not the activity. The body is active. I am not the active. Basically, so that thing also has been negated. So, so Atma's nature must be distinct from what I take myself to be. And therefore, I am Satchidananda. Body, mind, sense complex is Asat, Achit, Anananda. Well, Asat means that is subject to birth and death, and Achit means inert, and Ananda means limited, and therefore Anananda is equal to limited. And that's how we have to take. So I am Satchidananda, I am Nitya, I am Nirmala, etc. etc. And my nature all is basically Ananda. I'm means the limitlessness which express itself in the moments of joy. That's my nature. There is, but Swamiji, that cannot be my nature. Because you say in the mind this Atma gets, reflected, and therefore basically in the moment of joy I drop all the notions, and that the Ananda which is there in moment of joy, that is yourself, etc. But it is subject to change, because it is Priya, Moda and Pramoda, right? So if it is Priya, Moda, Pramoda, means Ananda also is like that, has a gradation, happy, happier, happiest. Then Atma is subject to change, it means. No, it's not so. That is because somebody asked me this question. It's a really wonderful question. So, well, you say Atma is Nirvikara, but then Ananda also has a Taratamya, degrees. And therefore, how can you say Ananda is Atma? Then Atma is also subject to change, degrees. Well, that's not correct. You are able to drop the identification to the extent you are able to drop the identification. To that extent you are happy. To the extent you are able to drop the identification with the body, mind, sense complex, to that extent your nature gets manifest, because your nature is totally distinct from that. But what happens in a certain moments, well, definitely I have become happy. My nature gets reflected, well, in a moment of joy, but I am not able to drop totally the limitations. And then therefore, we feel that the Ananda also to that extent will be limited. Like you can understand very well in a deep sleep state. In a deep sleep state, you are able to disidentify totally. Then you basically in a deep sleep state, Ananda also is fullness. Ananda also is, total. Same way, even in certain moments of joy, you just forget totally yourself, to the extent that even the posture of laughter, etc. also, if I take a photograph and if I show you, say, no, I cannot laugh like that. The way you laugh, sometimes you just forget yourself. So the moment that, to the extent that you are disidentifying with the body, etc., well, to that extent, the manifestation of yourself also will be there in the mind. And therefore, basically, Atma is Ananda only. But if I am able to drop the identification totally in a moment of joy, to that, then the joy also will be in form of ecstasy, like say. So, Priya, Moda and Pramoda. So, happy, happier and happiest. And they give a very beautiful example of, gaining Ananda, etc. is what? So, they say, well, suppose if I have a weakness, I'm sickness, well, and some kind of a sickness, well, I had having a fever also, and some kind of a tumor has been detected by the doctor, and in the stomach, let's say, or in intestine, let's say some tumor has been detected. The moment it has been detected, well, I become so unhappy, and naturally I get worry also. And then I continue to worry till the report of that, biopsy, etc. The biopsy they do of that tumor. And till the report comes, you remain so much worried and so much, sorrowful, thinking that, imagining that, well, it could be a tumor of a cancer, etc. Perhaps you may think like that. Any tumor means cancer. We feel like that immediately. And the moment the report comes and it says, well, it is just a benign tumor, there's nothing to worry, it's not carcinogenic, it's a benign tumor. Well, I become so relaxed and become happy. Now, to begin with, you are not having a carcinogenic tumor, right? To begin with, you are not having. But you imagined that you had a carcinogenic tumor and you were sorrowful, all that. And then again you got relaxed from that. And so you become happy. So your own joy, actually, your own health, you are enjoying now. So this is what the situation is. Well, my Swarupam is basically fullness or limitlessness, but I imagine myself to be a body, mind, sense complex and feel the sense of limitation and become sorrowful, and then I drop the notion after getting knowledge, and then I become happy. That's how it is. So that happiness does not come from anywhere. In fact, happiness is my own nature. Or in a moment of joy also, I drop the identification experientially of the physical body, mind, sense complex, and I become happy. So my own joy I am getting, because in other moments I take myself to be limited and undergo all kinds of sorrow and worries, etc. So the moment I drop any notion which is the imaginary thing, which is born of ignorance, it may be experientially or it may be by gaining knowledge, ultimately my own nature, that is Ananda, I enjoy. Well, of course, in moment of joy, of course it is experiential, but this is like this. Therefore, the source of joy is only one, and that is Atma. The source of existence to the entire creation is one, that is Atma. The source of consciousness, well, that is one, that is Atma. There cannot be more than one source. That is the nature. So just like the heat is the nature of the fire, and therefore wherever you find a heat, you have to immediately think that the source is a fire. Same way here also, well, the source is for the existence or consciousness or the fullness or a joy or limitlessness, ultimately is one alone. And that is myself. And what is that called here as a Satchidananda Svabhava. This is what my nature is. And then Nitya, timelessness. Nitya means timeless. So we have seen that several times, of course. I don't end. My transaction through this medium, of course, ends. But my existence never ends. Like in sleep. And I have told you also during this week that in sleep and in a death, the situation is almost same. Well, in a sleep, drop the identification with the body, etc. You don't transact through the body. You are not aware of the body, etc. But at the same time, you exist in a deep sleep state. Same way after death also, you continue to exist while the body's prarabdha is over. Then you enter into a new body. In a deep sleep state, of course, you definitely get up in the same body. After death, of course, you give up this body and enter into a new body. That's a difference. But I continue to exist, whether it is a deep sleep state or whether it is a death, etc. And so, Nitya means timelessness. Well, my existence is all the time there. So that is what Bhagavan also told in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2, Vasamsi Jirnani Yatha Vihaya, etc. I give up the old clothes and wear a new one. Same way I take up a new body. Nirmalaha, ever pure. So all impurities belong to these three shariras. Basically, I am free from any malam. Malam means impurity. Impurity we generally consider as from the bodies you can say all attributes which are limited. Those attributes are basically malam or punya papam, etc. Also you can say. I am free from all the impurities. Means I am not a karta, I am not a bhokta, and therefore no punya papa belongs to me. And that is called nirmala. Anyway, and so examples have been given as usual. I have told you in Atmabodha, every verse there is an example. So arkasya svabhavaha prakashaha. Arkasya svabhavaha, light is the intrinsic nature of the sun. And then toyasya shaityam svabhavaha. And water also, of course, has the coolness, that is its nature. And agnehe ushnata. Agnehe ushnata, and then heat is heat is the nature of the fire. So yatha means example. So that way you have to understand. So how to become Satchidananda? You have told, you are Satchidananda. This is how it is. Okay, I am a Satchidananda, but then how to become Satchidananda? If you are Satchidananda, where is the question of becoming Satchidananda? So people have that kind of, Swamiji, okay, I am free. I understood, moksha is my nature, but then how to get moksha? Hayyo, what to tell now? this kind of questions are very common. Okay, Swamiji, I am free. Atma is free and Atma Swarupam is moksha, etc. But then how, when will I get moksha? That's another question. Or how will I get moksha? So this is how it is. Anyway. So, but still we definitely have a compassion and answer, dropping the notion that you are not free is moksha. Dropping the notion that you are ashuddha, well, you are shuddha. That is what the shuddhi is. That is what your nature is. You just drop the notion that you are not free. You are having impurities. You are having this limitation. You are basically, the prarabdha is behind you. Basically, I am persecuted to prarabdha. Drop that notion. Well, you are. That's what the freedom is. Dropping the notion is the freedom. That is what freedom. That's how we define moksha. Well, basically, moksha is nothing but, moksha means a freedom, and freedom from the notions which I carry because of ignorance. That's all. But how can I drop the notion? Well, disidentify with the physical body, mind, sense complex. That is what we call Atma Anatma Vivekaha, and carry on this discrimination between Atma and Anatma. You are Atma, and claim your nature, not claim outside. You claim to yourself that I am this consciousness, existence, etc., which is invariable factor, which is invariable. All other than you, other than I, the subject, everything is variable. You can understand, like, form consciousness is there. Form consciousness means, well, form is an object of consciousness. I am conscious of the form. I am conscious of the smell. I am conscious of the touch. I am conscious of the color. I am conscious of the body. I am conscious of the senses. I am conscious of the ignorance. I am conscious of the memory. They keep displacing each other. Memory consciousness is displaced by knowledge consciousness, and knowledge consciousness is displaced by ignorance consciousness, and that is displaced by form consciousness. That keeps on displacing each other. Consciousness is never displaced. Consciousness cannot be displaced. It is invariable factor. Even in terms of time, past consciousness and present consciousness and future consciousness. Past is replaced by the future, and future is replaced by the present, and what that keep on that will happen. But consciousness cannot be displaced by any of this. Anatma. They cannot. Why Swamiji, this body, etc., cannot displace consciousness? Because they are not there to begin with. They are basically mithya thing. And any mithya thing cannot displace what is real. That's how it is. Any mithya thing cannot displace this real. And therefore snake cannot displace the rajju. Well, in your understanding, you say it is a snake. But snake cannot be displaced. Snake cannot displace the rope. You can understand very well. Because the very existence of the snake is from the rope. And therefore, ultimately, we can say, rope displaces the snake. Snake cannot displace the rope. And therefore, this is how the whole Anatma Prapancha is like this. What is categorized by this sense, what we call it as a known or unknown. Any known or unknown object is always, is always associated with this sense, this. And the knower, well, basically, who is a conscious entity, is always associated with the I sense. And that I cannot be displaced. Consciousness cannot be displaced by anything. And therefore, ultimately, there is no question of becoming Satchidananda, etc. You are Satchidananda. Because you cannot be displaced by anything. You will be there all the time. You are an invariable factor in everything. Pratibodha viditam matam. Bodham prati yad viditam. Well, in every piece of knowledge which is arising in your mind, you are there. The object of the knowledge, well, they keep on displacing. Earlier it was a part knowledge, and right now a click knowledge, and then the mobile knowledge. Oh, that's okay. Objects keep on displacing. But the very knowledge, the consciousness cannot be displaced. And therefore it is called eternal, nitya. And therefore You know, you own up that. That's all. That you are this Satchidananda Atma. That's the only thing. There is no question of becoming Satchidananda. Okay, now let's go to verse 25. Atmanas Satchidamshascha Buddhir Vrittiriti Dvayam Sanyojya cha vivekena Janamiti pravartate. So now you can understand. If you remember in introduction, I have told you when we started the Atmabodha, I have told you the difference between Tattvabodha and Atmabodha, and that difference I am reminding you right now. Tattvabodha deals with all Vedantic principles in a very basic manner. Atmabodha is one step ahead. Sometimes, certain advanced principles also has been discussed in Atmabodha. That's the difference. Apart from here also Panchakosha Viveka and Shariratraya, Sakshi and everything, this also we are seeing. So basic things are there, but sometimes some advanced point also will come. That's the difference between Tattvabodha and Atmabodha. That point now is getting proved here. Now verse number 25 and 26, certain subtle concepts of the Vedanta has been addressed which has not been discussed in Tattvabodha. And so, very significant thing. And Shankaracharya ji says, I am beyond this transaction. Basically, I am beyond this transaction. My presence is of course required, but I am not involved in the transaction. My presence is required means basically there will never be a possibility that my absence will be there. Right now, I just so told you, I will be invariable factor throughout, and my nature is existence. And therefore, it will never be the situation where I become non-existent. So I will be all the time there. And then, but other than me, they appear and disappear. If you remember, I have, while discussing Kenopanishad, I have told you the difference between an inert thing and conscious thing is this. Inert thing is temporary. I have given you 5 attributes. One of them is this. It is agantukam. It appears, disappears. Whereas consciousness, which is distinct from an inert thing, naturally by common sense, consciousness and inert thing, they are opposite. Therefore, if inert thing is temporary, coming and going, then consciousness is something which will be always there. That's a main thing. That is, so Shankaracharya says, I am this beyond transaction. The consciousness is beyond transaction. My presence is required, it will be always there. Yet, I am not involved in any transaction. Then what type of transactions are there? 2 types of transactions are there. One is a transaction by which I gain knowledge. That's called Jnana Vyavahara. In that transaction, there is a processing involved. And the processing, there are 3 things are there. One is a Nyata, another is a Gneyam, and third is a Jnana. Nyata means it's knower, Gneyam the object of knowledge, and the Jnana, very process of knowing. These 3 things are involved in the Jnana Vyavahara, or a transaction by which one gains knowledge. That is one type of Vyavahara. Second is a transaction in which there is activity. Kriya is involved, and we call it Karma Vyavahara. And in that also there is a Triputi. 3 things are there. Triad is there. What are there? Karta, the doer, and the karma, the object of action. And the third is the very karma, the process of activity, etc. So these 2 types of vyavaharas are there, basically. And Shankaracharya ji explains here the I, the Atma, which is free from both. I, the Atma, does not do any transaction because I am not a Jnata, I am not a Karta, etc. And so, I am beyond both this vyavahara. So he takes here now, out of these 2 vyavaharas, he takes in this verse a Jnana Vyavahara. Karma Vyavahara, he keeps it away. He takes here at a transaction in which a process of knowing is involved. And he will explain the process of knowing. And lastly, will say, in this process of knowing, basically Atma is free from that. Atma's presence is definitely required, Without that, nothing can happen. But basically, Atma does not jump into the transaction of a knowing. Well, it basically Atma itself is not a knower, etc. So that is how he is explained. So right now, well, the process of knowing is going on your part, right? Right now, the process of going the knowledge takes place, and therefore process of knowing is there. So right now you are doing Jnana Vyavahara. And in that Jnana Vyavahara, well, definitely you are a Nyata, the knower. My words are a object of knowledge for you, and the Jnanam takes place in the mind through the, that is called a Jnana Kriya. So that is process of knowing. And we say, then if Shankaracharya says, well, definitely I am basically free from this Jnana Vyavahara. I mean, I am free from any Vyavahara. That is how Mandukya Karika said Avyavaharim. But anyway, we are taking here Jnana Vyavahara. So if I am not doing this, I am not involved in this Jnana Vyavahara or the transaction of a knowing, then who is involved? So, well, we will have to Shankaracharya ji makes us understand that something else is involved other than Atma in a process of knowing. Atma is not involved. What is involved? We say reflection. We'll go to the verse later. We'll first understand as it is. So, reflected consciousness is involved. And in all transactions, any kind of a transaction, it may be a Jnana Vyavahara or a Karma Vyavahara. It may be a transaction of a activity, transaction of a knowing, whatever it is, ultimately reflected consciousness is involved. And mechanism of this process is like this, that I am basically a Chaitanyam, limitless consciousness, and mind and buddhi, well, are reflecting medium. So when they are in proximity, well, definitely, especially in a waking state. That's how proximity means this. Basically, everything is non-separate from me. That you know very well. And non-separate means definitely there is a question of earlier there is a distance and now there is a proximity. It's not like that. So when I say that when the pot is in proximity of clay, there is a question of a distance between a pot and clay. But we say that. Why should you say? Don't create confusion in us. Drop that word. No, I don't want to drop. Why? Then why are you saying why are you using word proximity? Because, well, a state of experience will come in which even mind and buddhi, intellect, etc. are resolved. So there is a question of proximity then. So in a waking state, of course, we will have to say they are in proximity. In deep sleep state, of course, they are resolved. So there is no question of proximity at all. That's how I am using the word proximity. You can understand that. So there is no question of a distance, etc. here. And if they are in proximity, definitely the Chaitanyam, the nature of the material from which this mind, etc. is made, of such a finer material that this consciousness gets reflected into the buddhi or mind. Let's say one thing only. Let's say mind. Consciousness is reflected in the mind. Clear? When they are in proximity. Means in a waking state. Well, consciousness is all pervading. It is all the time there. And when the mind arises in a waking state, well, becomes awake. And then definitely consciousness immediately get reflected into that. And when that consciousness reflected in the mind is called knower. So please understand this. Consciousness reflected in the whole mind. Whole mind is conscious. Well, we call it that consciousness which is enclosed now in the mind. That consciousness we call it as a Chidabhasa. So reflected consciousness. And we call it as a knower. So now in that process of knowing, this is one of the element. Knower is one element, and that knower is nothing but the reflected consciousness or the consciousness enclosed in the mind, etc. And that is due to because the mind is which is in the proximity of the consciousness, while the consciousness gets reflected into it. And that is how one entity we have got of the Jnana Vyavahara. Out of the triad, in the process of knowing or in the transaction of knowing, one entity called Nyata or the knower, we have got it now. It's a reflected consciousness. Okay? So consciousness reflected in the whole mind. Again I am repeating, because consciousness again is going to be reflected in the mind. It will be called something else. But let's right now, for time being, consciousness reflected in the mind is called Nyata. And definitely it's a reflected consciousness. Just it is enclosed in the mind, and therefore the Nyata is always, the knower is limited entity. We feel also that way. Okay. Now when this Nyata, that is the consciousness along with, the mind along with this Chidabhasa, mind along with this reflected consciousness, when it is exposed to the external world, right? Now we have understood consciousness gets reflected in the mind. So mind is endowed with this Chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. That mind along with that Chidabhasa, which we call it as a knower, well, that knower, when it gets exposed to the varieties of the thoughts, it gets exposed to the external world, is able to develop varieties of the thoughts depending upon the object. And then definitely if that Nyata, the consciousness, the reflected consciousness along with the mind, when contacts this object, then definitely in that mind, which is now endowed with the reflected consciousness, we call it Nyata, the knower, in that mind a vritti, a thought arises of this, right? A book thought arises. Well, when a book thought arises, book thought is what? It's a modified mind, right? Nothing else. Thought means what? It's a modification of mind. So book thought also is what? It's a modified mind. And book thought is modified mind. The mind is basically inert. So thought also should be what? Inert. So a book thought, which is an inert entity. And so that thought also serves as a reflecting medium for the consciousness. Like, I give you example. There are two types of mirrors. One mirror which you hang in the bathroom, etc., a bigger mirror. And the ladies also keep a small mirror in their purse. Like that. So, a small reflecting medium. And that was a bigger reflecting medium. So, when consciousness reflected in the mind is like a bigger mirror. And that we call it as a Nyata. That's a bigger reflection. But that mind, of course, when basically, modifies into, when it contacts with the object, that mind modifies into a particular thought of a book. So in book thought also is a medium now, because that's ultimately mind. And therefore that book thought works as a smaller medium. And there also consciousness reflected, right? And not only that, the book thought plus that reflected consciousness will become book knowledge. That's how it is. So we the second factor, the knowledge, book knowledge, definitely there is a book thought plus that reflected consciousness or Chidabhasa. That is nothing but book knowledge. And so three things are there. Consciousness reflected in the mind called Nyata, reflected consciousness in the mind which is called Nyata, the knower. Then consciousness reflected in the book thought, etc., a particular thought becomes Jnanam, and definitely the book becomes a object of knowledge also. Book Jnanam is there, book knowledge is there, and what is the object of that book? So book becomes Gneyam. Clear now? Jnata, consciousness reflected in the mind is Jnata, consciousness reflected in the thought becomes Jnanam, and definitely the object of that Jnanam, object of that knowledge is this called Gneyam. So all the three things are now you must have understood. So basically, so clip knowledge means knowledge is nothing but this Chidabhasa alone. Clip knowledge means clip thought plus consciousness reflected in that, and that is how it becomes clip knowledge. So clip knowledge is also a Chidabhasa, Jnata also is a Chidabhasa, Jnanam also is a Chidabhasa, and definitely what is the object of knowledge? Well, definitely that book is a Gneyam. So that is how we understand. So, well, right now let's talk about right now, because the Jnana Vyavahara is taking place, and therefore let's talk about that. Right now you are Nyata, right? So you are basically consciousness getting reflected in the mind. You are in a waking state, and so mind is awake. Mind is very close to the consciousness. Very close means what? Non-separate actually. So consciousness getting reflected in the mind, and so right now you are a knower, and definitely as I am, my words are reaching to your ears, and then accordingly some thoughts also are taking place. Mind is getting modified into the word form, right? And the consciousness is reflected in every thought, and that is how you will have a knowledge from my words. And continuous knowledge is taking place, because continuous thoughts are there. In every thought, well, the consciousness also will be reflected. It's a mini reflection, let's say, and definitely that is how knowledge takes place. My words become a object of knowledge. Well, and the knowledge which is occurring in your mind in the form of thought, that is jnanam, shabda jnanam, and and you are jnata, that is nothing but the consciousness reflected in the mind itself. The very first thing, that is jnata, and then thought, well, definitely turns into a knowledge. Part thought plus this chidabhasa becomes part knowledge, or words, the thought in the form of words plus chidabhasa will be the word knowledge, shabda jnana. And shabdas, all my words are nothing but object of knowledge. Could you follow that? So this is how the whole process of knowing involves three things: knower, the known, object of knowledge, and the very process of knowledge. Well, thought, occurrence of thought, etc. Everywhere you will find chidabhasa. Everywhere you find chidabhasa. And without chidabhasa, even there will not be object of knowledge also, right? So there is a part thought, but suppose chidabhasa, the reflection will not be there of consciousness. Well, there will not be a object of knowledge also, right? And therefore, basically three things are there, all due to chidabhasa. Jnata, Jneya and Jnanam. All what is involved is chidabhasa. So Buddhista, they call Buddhista chidabhasa. The consciousness endowed in the buddhi or the mind. Well, is Jnata, consciousness endowed with the vritti, with the thought. Consciousness enclosed in the thought, let's say that way. That is called Jnana. And definitely that Jnanam has an object also. The thought has a particular object, right? Because the mind has modified into that thought, and the thought of pertaining to the object. And therefore, as the consciousness get reflected in the thought, immediately object also gets illumined. Could you follow? And that we call it as object of knowledge. So that is how this is a process. So all these three come together, we call Jnana Vyavahara. When I go to sleep, well, when the mind itself resolves, and therefore consciousness will not get reflected in the mind, and therefore Jnata resolves. And then of course, well, if the whole mind resolves, there is a question of thought arising. That also will not be there. And therefore consciousness reflected in the thought also will not be there. So vrittistha chidabhasa also will not be there. Consciousness reflected in the thought also will not be there, and therefore the very knowledge also will not take place. And therefore, if the knowledge itself does not take place, there is no question of talking about the object of knowledge. That also will not be there. So, basically in the deep sleep state, there is no Jnana Vyavahara. What I am trying to prove is the third point in our discussion, 5-point program of consciousness, in the nature of consciousness. The third point I said is, well, even if the body etc. is a medium of transaction for the consciousness with the world, if that is not there, I don't transact. That is correct. But I don't exist. That is not correct. I continue to exist, but I don't transact. That is what we can understand now. Well, in the process of knowing, in the transaction of a knowledge, what is involved is a chidabhasa, not I the consciousness. And therefore I continue to exist. Well, definitely, even in absence of a transaction. How will you say our own experience of deep sleep state? Because many people feel that, well, the body dies, I also die. Body continue, when body becomes non-existent, I also become non-existent. No, sir. You don't become non-existent. But Swamiji, where I is not there, but that I, that Nyata will not be there. That's what I'm telling you. Because basically consciousness reflected in the whole mind is this knower, I. That if this mind resolves, well, definitely the very I thought will not arise, the Nyata, the knower will not be there. And definitely consciousness getting reflected in the thought also will not be there, because the mind has resolved. And there will not be any object of knowledge also. And well, but definitely the I, the consciousness, continue to exist even after the death, as I continue to exist in a deep sleep state. Clear now? This is clear? And therefore I is basically a consciousness whose nature is just existence. There is never a possibility, a remote possibility that I become non-existent. There is no question. Yes, transaction will be there, will not be there, that is depending upon Chidabhasa. If the medium is there, medium is awake, mind etc. is awake, well, I get reflected, become knower, and then vritti also arises depending upon an object. Well, but who contacts this? The mind along with the Chidabhasa contact this object. And a thought form pertaining to the book will arise. And in that also I will be reflected, because ultimately it is mind only. And of course it is a smaller, mini Chidabhasa. And of course then book knowledge takes place. Book thought plus Chidabhasa reflected in that thought becomes book knowledge. And so Jnata, Jnanam, and the book, very book itself becomes an object of knowledge. So all this Triputi, the triad involved in the process of knowing, in the transaction of a knowledge, Jnata, Jne and Jnanam, all ultimately belongs to Chidabhasa. Well, that is fake I. It's not real I. You can understand it is fake I. Chidabhasa means what? It's a reflection is reflection. It is ultimately we have to say it is fake. Anyway, we'll see that. So we can derive again through logic. Anvaya Vyatireka I have given you. Always keep it handy, Some people keep handkerchief all the time. Every 5 minutes they will bring it out. So this Anvaya Vyatireka, keep it with you all the time. So what is Anvaya? Co-presence. What is Vyatireka? Co-absence. So what is Anvaya here? What is co-presence? Co-presence means together. Present together. Absent together. Yeah, that is co-absence. That is Vyatireka. What is that presence? What is co-presence? First tell us. Yeah. Chidabhasa sattve vyahvara sattvam. Whenever the Chidabhasa is there, reflection is there, there the Vyavara takes place. But how Chidabhasa arises? Well, when the medium should be there, then the reflection occurs. What are the mediums? Well, then mind etc. is a medium. Bodies are the medium ultimately. And therefore, we should start with the mind only, basically. Nothing else. Don't go further. That is all later. The very first thing is, mind is such a material. It's like everything ultimately made up of five elements. But basically, a book and mirror has a difference. This cannot reflect my face. And the mirror reflects my face. Therefore, I should consider it as even though that is also made up of earth and this is also made up of earth, let's say, but ultimately that's a finer material. We have to accept it. Same way, mind, of course, only we have to take mind. Rest, physical body. Physical body also is a medium of reflection. Don't say that way. Mind alone we have to take. And through mind, of course, that Chidabhasa spreads. The Jnata spreads in the eyes and ears and everywhere. When Jnata comes to the eyes, he says, I am seer. But seer basically is knower. When Nyata comes to the ears and identify with the ears, he says, I am hearer. Hearer also is a knower. Seer also is a knower. Taster also is a knower. So ultimately from the mind, which is part of the subtle body, the reflection spreads through the senses and everything to the entire subtle body. And that subtle body present in this particular physical body spreads in this physical body. Well, ultimately when I say I am knower, even I take this physical body also into the knower. And outside objects I consider it as a gneyam. It's a known and I am knower. You say like that. This is known. I am knower. So you have taken physical body also into the knower. Because ultimately it has begun with the mind. Ultimately it has begun with the subtle body. In that subtle body also begun with the mind. Swamiji, but does it really happen like that? When I get up, basically does it happen like this? That I get reflected and then slowly, then... Well, this is a process. Please understand, it's a model. This is the way we explain. So basically, how can I be a not knower in the deep sleep state? How can I consider myself as a knower in a waking state? What is the difference between two? How will you explain that mechanism? So this is way. This is a way of explanation. This is a way of explaining the whole thing. Anyway, so basically Chidabhasa Sattve Vyavara Sattvam. This is Anvaya. Wherever the Chidabhasa is, well, the Vyavara takes place, the transaction takes place. What kind of a Vyavara? Jnana Vyavara, Karma Vyavara, whatever. Transaction through which I know, transaction through which I act, whatever. So, and Chidabhasa Abhave Vyavara Bhavaha, that is co-absence. When Chidabhasa is not there, well, Vyavara does not take place. When Chidabhasa will not be there, well, the medium will resolve, then the Chidabhasa will not be there. When the medium will resolve, well, then in a deep sleep state, then definitely. Then reflection also will not be there, and then definitely transaction also will not be there. So this is called Anvaya Vyatireka. But I, the consciousness, all pervading consciousness, or limitless consciousness which pervades everything, is basically free from any transaction. I am not a Jnata, I am not a Karta, well, and I am not at all involved in process of knowing or process of activity. And that is how we call ourselves as a akarta, abhokta, etc. So I am not a karta, I am not a bhokta, I am not a jnata, we can say. But Swamiji, bhokta why you have brought? Because whoever is a karta is a bhokta. And therefore, we have to extend it. Whoever is a karta is a bhokta. Because people may ask question, you are here, two types of transaction are there. But that bhokta also is a transaction, basically. Bhokta, bhogya and bhoga, that also is transaction. But Swami, what is the difference between Jnata and Bhokta? If you remember, I have already told you. Swamiji, because when you are enjoying this, a color of this book, then you are basically a knower of the color, and you say you enjoy, you experience the color. So what is the difference between a knower and experiencer? Bhokta means experiencer. And Jnata means knower. What is the difference? I have already told you. If you remember, it is good. Or I can give you homework at least. After 15 days, I get a chance of giving you homework. If you tell me tomorrow, I will tell you answer tomorrow. Don't worry. But I have already told you the difference between a Bhokta and Jnata. If you remember, it's fine. Otherwise, I will tell you. Anyway, let us look into this verse. It is a little typical verse. We have to do the syntactical connections has to be done properly. First thing is, Atmanaha Satchidamshascha Buddhihi iti sanyojya. We will have to take it. So, Atmanaha Satchidamshascha. Atma with its existence and consciousness. Satchid Amsha. Means we know Atma has no Amsha. One amsha sat, other amsha chit. Don't think that way. It's nature. So Atma along with its existence and consciousness, buddhihi iti you have to supply. It is not there. Buddhihi iti. Now sanyojya. So when Atma with its existence and consciousness, sanyojya, came in proximity with mind, right? Buddhihi iti came. So buddhihi iti you have to supply. came in contact with that, like what? Like face and mirror came in proximity. Well, same way. So then what? Then Jnata kalpyate, Chidabhasaha kalpyate. When Atma along with, or Atma along with existence and consciousness combine with Buddhi, then definitely what we have said is Jnata kalpyate, Jnata arises. Yeah, that is Chidabhasa alone, you know very well. So like face and mirror, when they come in contact with each other, well, definitely reflection arises. Same way Atma and Buddhi came in contact with each other, they are in proximity with each other. What will arise? Jnata, the knower arises, which I have already explained you. So first thing is Jnata, because we have to see, he is talking about transaction, and transaction involves triad, and then we will have to explain each one of that, right, of these three. So Jnata kalpyate, the knower is generated, kalpyate, everywhere kalpyate. That is not really, it does not, actually nothing arises and nothing sets. This is the way we explain everything. This is the way we explain. So everything, whole Srishti is a kalpana. So when Jnata arises, Jnata is born. So nothing, kalpyate. Everything kalpyate. Ultimately, wherever Srishti comes, you have to put in, when Srishti comes in bracket, you always write kalpana. Projection. I used to earlier use the word projection. Because ultimately born from Maya or Ajnanam, whatever you say. Ultimately it is kalpana. What is born of Maya or Ajnanam is kalpana, projection. Like, how can you say projection? Give example. I have given you several times, sir. What example? You, out of the ignorance of the waker, you create the world, whole dream world, and that is projection. Dream world is projection. Dream world is not real, everyone knows, and therefore that is how. So I have used the word kalpyate. Atmaha satchidamshasya buddhi iti sanyojya jnata, or in bracket chidabhasaha kalpyate. Right? Chalo. That is one thing is over. Next combination now. Next sanyojanam. Next combination is what? Atmanaha satchidamshasya buddhehe vrittihi iti dvayam. Not buddhi. Buddhehe vritti. Well, so I the consciousness, I the Satchidatma, and buddhi vritti, the thought, mini reflecting medium, right? The thought, sanyojya, when they came in proximity or when they combine, well, definitely again reflection arises, that we call jnanam. So basically, and jnanam, and that may pertain to any object, but that is called jnanam. And that is how that jnanam also is kshanikam, because that jnanam involves a thought, and that thought is kshanikam. Definitely, and thought means what? Definitely nothing but an object modified into the mind, that is thought, right? Mind, what is that modification? Mind, which is very, very subtle, takes the form of this object. That's how it is. So we always call as a ghatakara vritti. That akara means this modification. Akara means mind in the form of this. Mind in the form of mobile, mind in the form of pen, mind in the form of this. How can mind take shape, Swamiji? Because it is so subtle. Why it is so subtle? Because it is subtle body. Therefore, it is subtle. And therefore, ultimate. Why Valmiki Ramayana is called, who wrote this Valmiki Ramayana? Valmiki. So that is how it is. So basically, anyway, so this is, we will have to take it that way, which is very subtle, so it can take any shape. But how can it take shape? Because the mind from the senses goes out and contact. That's all vritti vyapti. Well, we will not go into that detail, but you know very well. This is how we discuss. Anyway, so I the consciousness, or I the Satchidatma, sanyojya, combined with what? Buddhehe vrittihi, not buddhi, buddhehe vritti, with the thought of the mind, and definitely gets reflected in the thought of the mind, not the mind. If the mind, then it is Nyata. If the thought of the mind, it is Jnanam. And then definitely the thought is in the form of that object, and therefore object also gets reflected. Objects become the object of knowledge, because the thought has been, this thought is nothing but the now turned to Jnanam, knowledge. Why? Because the consciousness get reflected into the thought. I am doing this, but in Nididhyasanam you keep on doing like this. Please don't do. I may do like this. In Ahmedabad, one person has that habit of doing like this. Consciousness illumines. So all the time keep doing like this. So don't do that. I may do, but you don't do. So nothing happens like that. So basically, so this is how it is. So knowledge, the consciousness which is all pervading. Well, and the thought also is in proximity of the consciousness. In that thought, consciousness gets reflected, and the thought is no more a thought. It is Jnanam. Part thought plus consciousness reflected becomes part knowledge. And object of knowledge is of course part which is there, right there in the thought, right? Right there in the thought. And that is how Jnata, Jnanam, Gneyam. Every entire transaction is done by this reflected consciousness. I, the consciousness, which is limitless, all pervading in all the thoughts and minds and everywhere, and which is ever present, which is the nature of existence, it is all the time there, without any transaction. Not involved, not jumped into transaction. I am always there. Right? When the mediums, definitely in waking state, etc., when they arise, a whole this Vyavahara takes place. When they resolve, transactions ends. I don't end. I was transacting the conscious in the waking world. That I continues to be there without transaction in a deep sleep state. So I am there in all the three states. I am there very next day, all the three states. I am there very next day, all the three states. I am there after 1 month, all the three states. After a year. If you remember Panchadashi, we have discussed this. So the existence and consciousness continues to be there even after this body, etc., reflecting mediums drop. Could you follow? Well, then in next body, again I start getting reflected and everything. Well, which body? Physical body. Then what about subtle body? Subtle body remains one, right? Therefore, subtle body leaves this physical body and moves to the another body. Okay, Swamiji, subtle body moves to the other physical body. So, well, my reflection also moves. That's a superimposition. That's a superimposition. Only subtle body moves. We cannot say Chidabhasa moves, because Chidabhasa is all the time there. How can you say all the time there? Because consciousness is all pervading. And if it is all pervading, the reflection will be all the time there, because the medium is moving. Then reflection also keeps moving like that, we say, but it is not. Basically, so we say Jiva departed, etc. is not correct. Well, if Jiva goes along with that like that, basically because in between, it has to move, because in between there is nothing, the reflection cannot be formed. The reflection will continue to be there, because consciousness is all the time there and it is all pervasive. All pervasive means it is there all the time. If so, reflecting mediums move, and then the reflection will be continuously there. Could you follow? So to say, like, suppose if in this sunlight, I move with a bucket of water, suppose, in this sunlight, outside, and then definitely reflecting medium, that is bucket of water, keeps moving. Swamiji, then reflection also is moving. Don't say that because the all pervading sunlight is continuously falling on the reflecting medium, that is water. And therefore reflection is all the time there. If it is all the time there, where is the question of moving the reflection? Movement will be possible of anything when it is at a one place and at other place it is not there. It's not like that. It is all the time there. As the medium moves, the reflection also will be there all the time. Form reflection will be there all the time. Could you follow? And therefore, reflecting medium, subtle body moves. Subtle body moves from one body to the another. And definitely, and all pervading consciousness gets reflected there also. Not gets reflected. It was there even in between also, between the two bodies also. When he has not got the body, that time also subtle body was there, and subtle body get reflection also was there all the time. And therefore, it is all medium, reflecting medium and reflection can never be separated. Reflection and reflecting medium can never be separated. Reflected sun and water, reflecting medium, can never be separated. Reflecting medium, mirror, and the reflected sun can never be separated. Reflected, original sun is all distinct. That's not a problem. Reflect, I am talking about reflected sun. Anyway, so this is how, well, definitely we get a jnanam. In the process of jnanam, well, definitely I am not involved. So, but the beautiful thing is, let me drop that idea, right? Because that I will talk to you in the next class. But I will complete this verse first. Buddhehe vrittihi atmanaha satchidam shasya dvayam sanyojya. So either Satchidatma and this reflecting medium called the vritti, etc. Sanyojya, dvayam, these two, sanyojya, well, when they combine together, well, then definitely we got a jnanam, knowledge takes place. And definitely object of knowledge also will be illumined in that. Definitely thought has a definitely object. There is a thought and there is no object. That cannot be. Thought means definitely object is there, because thought is nothing but a modification of that mind pertaining to the object, and therefore definitely object is there and that object gets illumined. We call it as a gnayam, object of knowledge. So, well, all this belongs to Chidabhasa. I don't have any connection with anything in this transaction. Well then, but I basically out of ignorance connect myself to the Vyavara. And well, I say I am Nyata, etc. Right? So avivekena janami iti pravartate, Shankaracharya ji says. Avivekena. Because of a non-discrimination between a Chidabhasa and myself, ultimately, that, or because of indiscrimination, because of not knowing that Chidabhasa does this Jnana Vyavara, I say I know, janami, I know, etc. Means I am the knower, etc. That's not correct. Actually, Chidabhasa is mithya. This reflected face is a false face. So whatever happens to this false face, nothing happens to me. Right? Whatever happens to this false face, that does not happen to me, the original face. Same way, whatever happens to the Chidabhasa, which is false, is a reflection, nothing happens to me. It does not affect me. So as a Jnata, I may be affected, but really speaking, I am not affected. Right? Maybe object of knowledge is such, because of filth, Jnata feels, Jnata feels that he is affected. Suppose I see some person with whom I had a big quarrel, big fight. When I know that, as a seer, I am affected. As a seer, I am affected. Seeing an object of, object of seeing is that person. Well, I feel as a seer, I am affected. But basically, the consciousness, is not affected because I am not the seer. Seer is affected, hearer is affected, and taster is affected, toucher is affected. All these are affected. Knower is affected by the object of knowledge, etc. or by the knowledge, etc., which arises in the mind, may be getting affected. Nyata is affected, knower is affected, but I am not affected because I am not the knower, etc. And therefore, I am transaction free and I am free from the samsara, born of the transaction also. If the same thing is applied to karta, karma, etc., that's a big problem. If you take yourself karta, then you cannot make yourself free from the guilt, etc. I did, etc., etc. Well, we there also we can extend the same thing there also. Here, of course, Shankaracharya ji took Jnana Vyavahara. Same thing you can apply it for Karma Vyavahara also. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.